The murder so horrific. Even investigators were shaken. True crime documentary. Desert has a silence that feels eternal until it doesn't. April 29th, 2023. The sun had barely risen over Phoenix when a woman walking her dog froze mid-step on a quiet trail. Something in the brush, something out of place, caught her eye. What she saw next would unravel an entire city's sense of safety. That place, the Reach 11 Trail, had always been a sanctuary. A stretch of rugged beauty where morning joggers met the first golden light of day. Among them was Lauren Heike, a 29-year-old woman who loved the calm of solitude and the rhythm of her steps against desert soil. She wasn't supposed to vanish. Not here, not in daylight, not in her own neighborhood. When Lauren didn't show up to work and her phone fell silent, her friends knew something was wrong. But by the time her body was found, hidden behind tangled brush and barbed wire, a new nightmare began. A city that prided itself on peace was about to discover the horror lurking just beneath the surface. This is not just the story of a murder. It's the story of what happens when light collides with darkness, and a community is forced to face the unthinkable. Welcome to the final footage. Before the tragedy, there was light, and her name was Lauren Heike. Those who knew her never describe her in past tense easily. She wasn't just someone who smiled. She radiated. Her friends often said she had a way of making the world feel less heavy, as if just by being there, she could balance the noise and pressure of everyday life. Born and raised in Kitsap County, Washington, Lauren was the kind of person who found joy in the smallest things. She'd talk about the smell of pine trees after rain, or how morning coffee always tasted better if you watched the sunrise. To her, happiness wasn't about grand gestures. It was about presence, about noticing, about gratitude. When she moved to Phoenix, Arizona, it was to start fresh. She'd recently gotten her own apartment near the Reach 11 Trail, a scenic stretch of land dotted with cactus, desert brush, and sunlight so bright it almost felt holy. For Lauren, it wasn't just a place to exercise. It was her sanctuary, a place to breathe, to think, to feel alive. Her mornings had a rhythm. Wake up early, text her close friend River Hubble something she was thankful for, grab a cup of coffee, and head out for a walk. That was Lauren, steady, grounded, peaceful. To anyone else it was just routine, but for her it was ritual, a quiet connection between herself and the world. Lauren worked as an esthetician, helping others look and feel their best. Her clients adored her, not just for her skill, but for the energy she carried. You could walk in broken and leave believing in yourself again, one of them once said. She had that rare gift of seeing people, truly seeing them. Her parents, Jeff and Lana, were her anchor. Their bond was more than familial, it was spiritual. Lauren would call them often just to tell them she loved them. She spoke of big dreams, maybe opening her own studio one day, maybe traveling more, maybe finding someone to share life with. But she was in no rush. For now, she was happy, building something quiet and steady in the Arizona sun. Phoenix was kind to her. She'd made new friends, found a small community of hikers and yoga lovers, and had begun to call the desert home. She felt safe there, safe enough to wander alone, safe enough to trust the silence of nature. But silence, as it turned out, can sometimes hide things we're not meant to hear. In the days leading up to April 28th, Lauren's life seemed perfectly ordinary. Work, walks, laughs with River over the phone. She posted light-hearted photos, desert trails, sunrise glows, the occasional coffee selfie captioned, "Grateful." Everything about her life felt peaceful. That's what makes what happened next so hard to process. There were no signs of danger, no warnings, just a morning like any other. One that should have ended with her back at home, showered and smiling. Probably texting River another gratitude message, but that morning would never end the way it should have. When the sun rose over Phoenix on Friday, April 28th, 2023, Lauren laced up her shoes and stepped out into the soft desert air. It was the same path she'd taken countless times. She'd even mentioned to River earlier that day how good it felt to wake up early, to breathe fresh air, to just exist. Nobody, not River, not her family, not even Lauren, could have known that this simple act of peace would collide with something dark and violent. Because sometimes horror doesn't announce itself. It waits quietly in the places we feel safest, in broad daylight, beneath blue skies on familiar trails. That morning, as the city stirred awake, Lauren Heike disappeared into the desert sunlight. It was a perfect morning in North Phoenix, the kind that makes you forget the world can ever be cruel. The sky was a cloudless blue, the air already warming under the Arizona sun. The Reach 11 Trail, a winding stretch of desert path carved between neighborhoods and natural brush, was alive with sound. Shoes crunching on gravel, the rustle of wind through cactus spines, the faint calls of morning birds. Lauren Heike loved mornings like this. It was Friday, April 28, 2023, and she told her friend River Hubble just hours earlier that she felt grateful to wake up, have coffee, and get some sun. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. Around 9:30 a.m., Lauren left her apartment near 64th Street and Mayo Boulevard. She wore workout clothes, black leggings, a sports bra, and sneakers, her usual hiking gear. She brought nothing more than her phone, her water bottle, and that gentle sense of peace she carried everywhere she went. To the casual eye, she was just another young woman out for a walk, smiling, earbuds in, the world quiet around her. But somewhere along that sunlit path, as she walked deeper into the trail's quiet isolation, something, or someone, entered her orbit. It's unclear when exactly she crossed paths with the man who would change everything, but police would later piece together fragments of that morning, a timeline built from silence. At 10 a.m., a few regulars on the trail noticed something strange. A man, tall in dark clothing, moving quickly through the brush rather than along the path. One hiker recalled thinking he looked out of place. Another thought maybe he was lost. None of them knew they had just seen the last witness to Lauren alive. By 10:30 a.m., her phone stopped responding. No messages, no movement. The sun climbed higher, and the desert grew hotter. To understand the eeriness of that moment, you have to picture it. The Reach 11 Trail isn't some remote canyon far from the city. It's tucked between Phoenix and Scottsdale, surrounded by homes, coffee shops, and quiet suburban life. You can hear traffic if the wind shifts just right. It feels safe. That's why what happened there feels almost impossible. Somewhere between the cacti and the barbed wire fences, Lauren's morning turned into a nightmare. A struggle, swift and violent, hidden from view. She likely ran. Police later found torn fabric and signs she tried to escape. But the desert offers little shelter. The silence that had once comforted her became a prison, and then, nothing. By afternoon, when her friends hadn't heard from her, concern turned to panic. She wasn't the type to disappear. Calls went unanswered. Texts stayed unread. That same day, her coworkers grew worried when she didn't show up for work. "Lauren's never late," one of them said later. We knew something was wrong. By evening, the desert sky faded into a burnished orange, and the day closed without her returning home. Her car sat in its spot. Her coffee cup from that morning still sat on the counter. The peace she'd built around her life had cracked, and no one knew yet how deep that fracture went. Somewhere out there, just beyond the reach of streetlights and safety, Lauren lay still. The woman whose laughter filled rooms, whose kindness lit up lives, was now missing, swallowed by a landscape she loved. The next 24 hours would change everything. The following morning, April 29th, a woman out walking her dog, someone who'd taken that same trail hundreds of times, noticed something odd near Libby Street. A glimpse of color where there shouldn't be any, a flash of fabric in the sand. She took a few steps closer, then stopped cold. It wasn't the desert playing tricks on her eyes. It was real, and what she saw would ripple through Phoenix like a shockwave. The quiet beauty of Reach 11 had turned into something else entirely, a place forever marked by fear, grief, and unanswered questions. Lauren Heike had gone for a simple morning walk, but by the time the sun set on April 28th, she had become the center of a mystery that would haunt the city, and the hearts of everyone who loved her. The desert has a way of holding secrets. For nearly 24 hours it kept Lauren's. It was Saturday, April 29th, 2023, around 10 a.m., when a woman named Kara took her usual morning walk along the Reach 11 trail. Her golden retriever trotted beside her, tugging at the leash, eager to explore the brush. To Kara, this was routine, a quiet ritual that brought her peace. But that morning, something was different. The air felt heavier. The trail, normally alive with joggers and dog walkers, was quieter than usual. Maybe it was the heat, or maybe it was something else. As Kara turned down a familiar curve near Libby Street, her dog suddenly stopped. Growling softly at the brush ahead, she followed the animal's gaze and froze. There, half hidden by desert shrubs and barbed wire, was a flash of black fabric against the pale sand. At first, Kara thought it might be trash or clothing someone had dropped. But as she took a step closer, the shape became clear, a human form lying motionless in the dirt. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The air seemed to drain from her lungs. "No, no, no," she whispered, fumbling for her phone. Her hands shook as she dialed 911. "Phoenix 911, what's your emergency?" I just found a woman's body out in the desert," she said, her voice trembling. "Can you give me your location?" "I was walking behind my house near Reach 11. She's not moving. It looks like she's been here for a while." The dispatcher tried to calm her down, but Kara could barely focus. Her eyes darted between her dog and the still figure in the brush. "She's wearing workout clothes," she said. "A black bra, black pants. One shoe is off. There's blood." Those words, "there's blood," changed everything. Police arrived within minutes. The heat was rising fast, and the desert air shimmered with tension. At first, officers thought maybe it was a hiker who'd collapsed from exhaustion or dehydration, common in the Arizona sun. But as they approached, that theory vanished. It was clear this wasn't an accident. There were signs of a struggle, torn fabric, footprints, the glint of a shoe tangled in wire. Lauren's body lay partially concealed, as if someone had tried to hide her. Officers quickly taped off the area. The crime scene, just steps from suburban homes, was surreal. Birds chirping above, sunlight slicing through cactus shadows, and in the middle of it all, silence. The kind of silence that feels sacred and wrong at the same time. One officer quietly murmured, "This shouldn't happen here." And that became the unspoken echo of the day. By the afternoon, detectives confirmed what many feared. The body was 29-year-old Lauren Heike, reported missing just the night before. When her name came over the police radio, one officer closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He had hoped this would be different. Word spread fast. Within hours, news vans parked near the trail entrance. Neighbors gathered, holding hands, whispering prayers. Some left flowers at the edge of the yellow tape. Others just stood in silence, unable to comprehend how something so violent could happen in a place so ordinary. For Lauren's friends and family, the call was devastating. Her parents, Jeff and Lana, were hundreds of miles away when they got the news. "We were hoping she'd just gotten lost or her phone died," Jeff later said. You never think the worst will happen, until it does. Her friend River, the last person to hear her voice, broke down when police confirmed it was her. That morning's conversation replayed in his mind over and over, her laughter, her calm, her gratitude for the day. "I keep thinking, what if I had called again?" he said later. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows over the desert, the investigation officially began. Evidence markers dotted the sand like stars fallen from the sky. Every footprint, every thread, every tiny fragment was bagged carefully. Anything that could whisper the truth about what happened out there. But even in those early hours, one thing was clear. This wasn't random chaos. Someone had targeted her, or crossed her path at exactly the wrong time. That night, the Reach 11 trail was sealed off. Police lights painted the desert red and blue as forensic teams worked in near silence. Overhead, the moon rose slowly, indifferent and pale, and while Phoenix slept uneasily, detectives began piecing together the first fragments of a mystery that would soon consume them all. Lauren Heike's body had been found. But the question that now hung in the hot desert air was the one that would haunt everyone involved for months to come. Who did this, and why? The moment Lauren Heike's body was found, the quiet suburb of North Phoenix changed forever. What had always felt like a peaceful desert sanctuary now pulsed with anxiety. The trail that once drew hikers and families became the center of a crime scene, a place wrapped in yellow tape and unanswered questions. For the Phoenix Police Department, the clock began ticking immediately. The crime was brutal. The setting, so public, so exposed, made it even more alarming. Detectives knew they were dealing with something that couldn't be left to rumor or panic. Every hour that passed meant the person responsible could slip further away. Lieutenant James Hester, a seasoned investigator known for his calm focus under pressure, took the lead. He'd seen terrible things in his years on the force, but something about this case felt different. Maybe it was how young she was. Maybe it was the senselessness of it. Or maybe it was the sheer cruelty hidden behind the stillness of that trail. "It was the kind of scene," one officer said later, "that makes you stop for a second before you can even start doing your job." The investigation began where the silence ended. Right there in the desert sand. Forensic teams scoured the area. Every inch of the trail was combed for evidence, footprints, fibers, fingerprints. They found signs of a struggle, torn leggings, a displaced shoe, branches broken from the force of someone running through the brush. There was blood near the barbed wire fence. faint traces that would later become the key to unraveling everything. Back at headquarters, Hester gathered his team in a small briefing room lined with maps of the Reach 11 area. They pinned photos, timestamps, and neighborhood grids across the wall. The first task was clear: build a timeline. Lauren was last seen alive around 10 a.m. on April 28th. Her friend River had spoken to her that morning in a brief call, a conversation filled with gratitude and warmth. She mentioned she was heading out for a walk. Then, nothing. By cross-referencing phone data, the detectives noted her device stopped transmitting shortly after she entered the trail. There was no call for help, no sign of struggle captured by any nearby camera, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The next step was the neighborhood canvass. Officers went door to door, talking to anyone who lived near the trail. Some residents mentioned seeing a young man in dark clothing walking quickly through the brush that morning. He didn't look like a jogger, more like someone trying not to be seen. Others mentioned something even more chilling. They had seen the same man lingering near the trail in the days before the murder. Watching people from a distance, it wasn't much to go on, just fragments. Memories blurred by heat and fear. But it was enough to start forming a shadow of who they might be looking for. Meanwhile, the forensic lab worked through the night. The most promising clue was the shoe found near the crime scene, one of Lauren's sneakers. It was bagged carefully, logged, and sent for DNA analysis. It would take time, but Hester knew it could hold everything they needed. In the meantime, the media storm grew. A young woman murdered on popular Phoenix Trail, headlines read. News anchors stood by the barricades, their voices heavy with solemn disbelief. The story struck a nerve. A young woman, alone in daylight, attacked in a place everyone thought was safe. Lauren's parents flew in from Washington that same week. At a small press briefing, her mother Lana stood trembling beside Lieutenant Hester, clutching a photo of her daughter smiling in sunlight. She was our light, she said softly. Please help find who did this. The community responded with an outpouring of grief and fear. Hikers stopped visiting the trail. Women in nearby neighborhoods began walking in groups, checking over their shoulders more often. Phoenix felt different, quieter, tenser. Then new leads began to surface. Over the next few days, 3 separate 911 calls came in from people who had seen someone acting strange near Reach 11, a man matching the same vague description. Tall, dark clothes, moving quickly, always looking around. The man seemed to appear and vanish, like a ghost in the desert heat. Detectives began reviewing surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses. At first nothing. Then, on May 2nd, just 4 days after the discovery, a clip caught their attention, grainy footage showing a man running through the desert brush with a backpack. Swinging behind him, the timestamp matched. The exact window when Lauren would have been on the trail. Hester leaned forward as the footage replayed. The man's face wasn't clear, but his build, his movements. There was something distinct. It wasn't a jog. It was a sprint, a run of panic. That night, detectives knew 2 things for certain. Lauren's death wasn't random, whoever this man was. He was close, too close. They didn't know it yet. But the desert itself had already recorded the truth. In dust, in blood. In the tread of a single shoe that would soon speak louder than any confession ever could. Investigations often move like shadows, slow, stretching, uncertain. But sometimes, one small fragment of evidence ignites everything. For the Phoenix Police Department, that moment came from 2 things: surveillance footage and a single shoe. By the first week of May 2023, the pressure was unbearable. The city was restless, the media relentless, and Lauren's family, still raw from shock, pleaded for answers. Detectives had fragments of witness statements, vague sightings, and a blurry figure caught sprinting through the desert. But fragments weren't enough. They needed a name. The turning point came when forensic analysts rushed back the first results from Lauren's belongings. On her shoe, the one left tangled near barbed wire, investigators found touch DNA. It wasn't much, just a trace. But sometimes that's all it takes. The lab worked through the night. When the DNA profile was loaded into the database, a hit returned. The name, Zion William Teasley. Age 22, criminal record, robbery, burglary, history of violence, and probation violations. Teasley wasn't a ghost. He lived less than a mile from the Reach 11 trail, practically in Lauren's backyard. He had recently been released from prison, and according to those who knew him, he had a history of aggression toward women. Detectives cross-referenced his name with surveillance footage. In the grainy clip, the figure sprinting across the desert brush carried a backpack, just like Teasley was known to wear. His height and build matched perfectly. It wasn't yet proof beyond doubt, but the puzzle was coming into focus. Meanwhile, more calls trickled in. Residents confirmed seeing a man matching Teasley's description near the trail days before the murder, watching, waiting, as if studying the movements of those who walked there. For investigators, it was a chilling realization. Lauren's death might not have been a random encounter. It might have been the moment where a predator finally acted. The task force doubled down. Undercover teams began quietly tailing Teasley, watching his movements, learning his routines. They needed to be sure because once they approached, there would be no going back. One detective later admitted that in those days leading up to the arrest, he couldn't sleep. It's different when you know who he is, when you're watching him walk free, and you know what he's capable of. As the net tightened, detectives also went deeper into his past. His record showed patterns, aggression, threats, manipulative behavior. He'd once told a probation officer that if he ever hurt someone again, he wouldn't stop himself. Chilling words, now ringing like prophecy. But the most decisive evidence was about to arrive. On May 4, 2023, surveillance cameras captured Teasley near his apartment complex, wearing the same dark clothing described by witnesses. Detectives compared the footage frame by frame to the desert clip. The posture, the stride, the way he carried the backpack, it was unmistakable. The breakthrough was complete. The DNA matched, the footage aligned, the witness descriptions held, and the proximity, less than a mile from the crime scene, made it undeniable. That afternoon, the task force gathered in the operations room. The air was thick with tension. Maps, photos, timelines plastered the walls. At the center was Teasley's face, no longer just a suspect, but the man who, in their minds, had stolen Lauren Heike's life. Detective Hester looked at his team. "It's time," he said. The breakthrough had become something heavier, a decision to move, to confront, to make sure the man responsible would never walk that trail, or any trail, again. The hunt was over. The arrest was next. By May 4, 2023, Phoenix police were ready. The breakthrough evidence, DNA on Lauren's shoe, surveillance footage, and witness statements, had built a case strong enough to act. Now it was about execution. The task force assembled quietly that morning. They knew the suspect, 22-year-old Zion William Teasley. They knew his habits, his residence, and his patterns of movement. What they didn't know was how he would react when cornered. This wasn't just another arrest. Teasley was young, strong, and unpredictable. His criminal past, robbery, burglary, assaultive behavior, suggested he wouldn't go quietly. Officers prepared for confrontation, every scenario running through their heads. The plan was surgical. Undercover units positioned near his apartment complex. Patrol cars waited just out of sight. A mobile command center coordinated every movement, every word, every second. Then came the moment. Teasley stepped outside his apartment, backpack slung over his shoulder. He was dressed casually, unaware that the walls of freedom were closing in. The lead detective gave the signal. Within seconds, unmarked cars boxed him in. Officers rushed forward, weapons drawn but voices calm. Zion Teasley, Phoenix Police. "You're under arrest. Don't move." For a heartbeat, he froze. His eyes flicked to the side, calculating. Could he run? Could he fight? But the ring around him was tight, unbreakable. Slowly he raised his hands. The cuffs clicked shut. The city exhaled. Inside the interrogation room, the atmosphere shifted. The room was cold, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. Across from him sat detectives who had spent days piecing together every fragment of evidence. Teasley at first was calm, detached. He denied everything. He claimed he had no connection to Lauren, no involvement in what happened. His eyes were sharp, almost rehearsed. But detectives had been here before. They knew denial was often the first mask. Piece by piece, they laid the evidence on the table. The DNA match, the surveillance footage, the timeline, witness descriptions, the fact that he lived less than a mile from the crime scene. The weight began to press on him. His calm faltered. His answers grew clipped, inconsistent. He fumbled when asked about his whereabouts on the morning of April 28th. His story shifted. Finally, when confronted with the DNA on Lauren's shoe, his demeanor cracked. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, exhaling heavily. One detective leaned in, voice steady but firm. "Zion, this is over. Her family deserves the truth. We already know. The question is, are you going to carry this lie? Or are you going to face what you've done?" What followed wasn't a full confession. Not in the way movies show them, with clear words and remorse. Instead, it was fragments, Admissions wrapped in denial. He acknowledged being on the trail that morning. He admitted seeing Lauren, but he twisted the narrative, painting himself as misunderstood, trying to avoid the full truth. Detectives pressed harder, but the full story remained buried under his evasions. Still, they didn't need his confession. The evidence was enough. When the charges were announced, first-degree murder and robbery, the courtroom filled with tension. Reporters lined the benches. Lauren's parents, Jeff and Lana, sat silently, holding hands. Prosecutors wasted no time signaling their intent. This was a case where the death penalty would be pursued. The brutality, the senselessness, the overwhelming evidence, it all pointed to the ultimate consequence. Public reaction was immediate. Some demanded swift justice. Others, shaken by the brutality, questioned how someone like Teasley, with a record of violence, was free to walk the streets at all. As the hearings began, Teasley's demeanor shifted again. In court he appeared restrained, almost detached. His voice when he spoke was low and unemotional. There were no apologies, no visible remorse. Just silence and calculation, but outside the courtroom, the impact was loud. The arrest had given Phoenix an answer, but not peace. The community still wrestled with grief, with anger, with fear. Lauren's family still faced the reality of an empty chair, an unfinished life. For detectives, the arrest was both a triumph and a wound. They had done their job, but the job had changed them. One officer later admitted he couldn't walk the Reach 11 trail again. It doesn't look the same, he said. The desert isn't quiet anymore. The case moved forward, trial scheduled for October 28, 2025. It would be a long wait, filled with motions, hearings, and delays. But the foundation was set. The man they believed responsible was behind bars. And for the first time since April 28, 2023, the city of Phoenix could finally breathe, not with relief, but with resolve. When the handcuffs closed around Zion Teasley's wrists, Phoenix breathed a complicated sigh. Relief, yes, that the suspect was no longer free to haunt the desert trails, but also grief, sharper than ever, because justice is never the same thing as healing. The arrest did not bring Lauren back. For her parents, Jeff and Lana Heike, the days after felt surreal. They had come to Phoenix not to visit their daughter, but to stand in front of cameras, to sit in courtrooms, to answer reporters' questions. Each time they spoke, they tried to shift the focus back to Lauren herself, not the horror of her death, but the beauty of her life. She loved this world, Lana told reporters softly. She loved people, and she believed in goodness. That's what we want people to remember. But memory and mourning are complicated things. The community surrounding the Reach 11 trail was forever changed. Neighbors who once walked alone now carried pepper spray, hiked in groups, or abandoned the trail entirely. A place that had once symbolized peace now carried the weight of fear. The trail itself became an impromptu memorial. Flowers piled against fences, handwritten notes, "You deserve better, Lauren," tucked into the wire. Runners paused mid-stride to leave tokens, bracelets, small stones, photos. Each gesture was a whisper of defiance against the darkness that had stolen her. The investigation's ripple spread wider still. Local news stations held panels on public safety. Parents began discussing self-defense classes for their daughters. City council members debated new security measures, more cameras, more patrols. Phoenix was wrestling with a question that felt painfully universal. How do you protect innocence without losing freedom? For the detectives, the aftermath was equally heavy. Solving the case had brought professional satisfaction, but personal weight. Lieutenant Hester, the lead investigator, admitted privately to colleagues that he struggled with the cruelty of it. He had seen many homicides in his career, but the randomness of this one, daylight, a peaceful walk, a victim who had done nothing but live her life, gnawed at him. Some officers described waking in the night, hearing echoes of the scene, the silence of the desert, the stillness of Lauren's body, the sound of her parents' voices when they were told the truth. Police work often requires building walls, but this case had broken through them. Meanwhile, media coverage intensified. Lauren's story wasn't just local, it spread nationally, resonating with audiences across the country. Her face appeared on national broadcasts, her name trending across platforms. Strangers who had never met her wrote letters to her family, expressing sorrow and solidarity. This attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it kept Lauren's memory alive and put pressure on the justice system. On the other, it meant her parents had to watch the most painful moment of their lives replayed endlessly on screens. Jeff Heike, standing before reporters after the arrest, held his composure but his voice trembled. "This has been the hardest week of our lives. But we want to thank Phoenix Police, the detectives, and this community. Your support has carried us through. For Lauren's friends, the loss was intimate and raw. River, the last person to hear her voice, spoke about her gratitude texts, the ritual that had defined their mornings. He admitted he still looked at his phone, expecting another message. It's strange, he said. Something so small becomes everything you miss. The wider community of Phoenix found itself reckoning with both fear and resilience. Runners returned to the trail slowly, deliberately, almost as an act of defiance. We can't give it to him, one woman told a news crew. This trail belongs to all of us, not to the memory of violence. Yet, for all the resilience, the aftermath remained marked by a quiet, collective grief. In the weeks that followed, a candlelight vigil was held. Hundreds gathered under the desert sky, holding flickering candles against the night. As her favorite songs played softly, her parents stood surrounded by strangers who felt like family. The light of the candles shimmered across the desert brush, a reminder that even in darkness there is still glow, still warmth, still love. The legal process, however, promised a long and grueling road. With prosecutors seeking the death penalty, the trial was set for October 28, 2025, years away. For Lauren's family, that meant years of hearings, years of revisiting evidence, years of facing the man accused of taking her away. Justice, they realized, would be slow, and yet they remained steadfast. We will stay strong for Lauren, Lana said. She deserves our strength, and we'll carry her light with us until the very end. In the quiet that followed the arrest, one truth lingered like the desert air. Tragedy does not end with a breakthrough, or even an arrest. Its aftermath stretches out, weaving itself into the lives of everyone it touches. For Phoenix, for the detectives, for the Heike family, life would go on. But it would never be the same. The story of Lauren Heike is not just about loss. It is about the fragile beauty of life. How a single morning walk, an act of peace and routine, can be interrupted by unimaginable cruelty. And it is about what we, as a society, choose to do in the wake of that darkness. Lauren was not defined by the violence that ended her life. She was defined by her light, her laughter, her gratitude for simple things. Those who loved her describe a young woman who carried warmth everywhere she went, who reminded others to slow down, breathe deeply, and find joy in the ordinary. That is the memory worth holding on to, and yet her story forces us to confront a painful truth. Safety is often an illusion. We build rituals, walks, morning routines, quiet escapes into nature, because they make us feel secure. But violence thrives in the cracks of that illusion. It hides in plain sight, waiting for moments when trust and innocence are most exposed. For the detectives who worked this case, the reflection is professional and personal. They solved the puzzle. They caught the suspect. But as one officer admitted, there are no victories here. Only the hope that maybe this will stop the next one. For the community, the reflection is broader. How do you continue living without fear after a tragedy like this? Do you stop walking the trail, or do you walk it anyway, as an act of defiance? Do you let the shadow win, or do you insist on carrying the light? In Phoenix, the answer has been complicated but resilient. People still return to the Reach 11 trail. They walk with each other, they walk with caution. But they walk. Because life must continue, and for Lauren's family, the reflection is both grief and grace. They have spoken often about not letting bitterness define their journey. We want people to know who Lauren was, her father Jeff said. She was kind, she was joyful, she was grateful. We don't want her story to be only about what was taken, but about what she gave. That distinction is vital. True crime often risks sensationalizing tragedy, turning victims into characters rather than people. But Lauren was not a character. She was real. She laughed, she dreamed, she loved. Her absence is not a headline. It is a wound felt daily by those who knew her best. The trial, set for October 28, 2025, will stretch on. There will be evidence, arguments, and verdicts. There will be discussions about justice, about the death penalty, about punishment. But even when the courtroom closes, the Heike family's true sentence will remain: a lifetime without their daughter. And that, perhaps, is the greatest reflection this story demands of us. That behind every true crime headline is a human being. Someone who deserved to live out the small, beautiful details of their life. Someone whose laughter should still echo in living rooms, whose footsteps should still trace familiar trails. At the final footage, we tell these stories not to shock, but to remember. Not to glorify the darkness, but to honor the light that was lost. In Lauren's case, that light was extraordinary, and though it was taken, it continues to shine in the love of her parents, in the resilience of her community, and in the act of remembering her as more than a victim. As you finish watching this story, take a moment to reflect on Lauren's life, not only on its end. Think of her morning gratitude texts. Think of her love for sunshine, for coffee, for the rhythm of her steps on the trail. Think of the small rituals that give your own life meaning, and cherish them. Because if Lauren teaches us anything, it is that life's greatest treasures are often its simplest. We hope this story stays with you, not as fear, but as a reminder of the importance of empathy, of safety, and of holding close the people you love. This has been the final footage. If you found meaning in this story, we invite you to subscribe, share, and join us as we continue exploring the mysteries, tragedies, and human truths that shape our world. Each episode, we remember those who cannot speak for themselves, and together we keep their memory alive, because in the end, every story deserves to be told. And every life deserves to be remembered.